Okay, so we're going to start with Dustin. Go ahead, Dustin.
All right, well, my name's Dustin Walsh. As you guys know, I graduated from this program actually 2 years ago. And after I graduated, before I graduated, I worked with Advantage Publishing. That was my internship. And then afterwards, I got another internship with the Florida Gators, which was actually kind of cool because when I was a student, I won the Caesar logo competition. So the Santa Fe mascot logo that you see all over, that was my brainchild. So I got to work with creative services and be a part of the branding and the whole process with that. But after that, yeah, I got an internship with the Florida Gators and then another internship with RTS, Regional Transit Systems. And so I got a lot of experience with marketing, surprisingly, and that sort of led me to where I am now, which is Front Street. If you're not familiar with them, they are a commercial real estate company that specializes in brokerage, property management, and insurance. And, you know, the last thing I would have thought is, hey, I'm going to work for a real estate company. Like, you don't usually think of a real estate company as like this creative industry, but they're actually different than most real estate companies. So we have an in-house marketing team that works directly with all of our clients, and we kind of function similar to like an ad agency where, you know, we work directly with our clients. You know, it's our team is centralized, so all the brokers kind of work together, and we're able to think outside of the box and come up with some more creative ways to market the properties. So I've been with Front Street for about a year and a half now, and I've done all kinds of stuff from posters to videos to web design, print media. I actually got my license to fly drones commercially, which was a pain in the butt. I had to, you basically have to take a pilot's exam. So you have to know all the airspace classifications and like all this like knowledge and stuff like that. But yeah, I was able to get my drone license and do some drone videos as well. And yeah, I handle all the signage. I did a lot of the social media for a while, the blogs, the website. Basically, I've had my hand in a little bit of everything. So today I want to showcase like a project from start to finish. So I know all you guys have had projects and multiple projects at the same time. But I feel like when you're a student, the process, the projects are, the process is a little different than when you're actually working. Like there's a lot more hands in it. There's a lot of meetings. There's a lot of sort of back and forth, not only with people you work with, but also with the clients. So it's like there's just numerous parts to it. So I want to showcase the custom downtown signage that we did for one of our clients. So basically we picked up a portfolio of properties that were all downtown, and we wanted to create signage that was different, that stood out. We wanted to create a sense of place for downtown Gainesville. So we wanted to kind of show it as a destination and as a place like, hey, you want to put your business here, it's unique, it's like nothing else. So this in the middle is our standard sign. It's our basic green sign that just says for lease. It's simple, easy to read. So we wanted to do something different. We wanted to think outside the box and do something a little more creative. So I walked downtown. I sort of, you know, picked up on things from where it was back in the day to where it is now. Looking at all the artwork, the art walls popping up, and some of the hand-painted signs, and as well as some of the architecture. There's all those old buildings and stuff like the Hippodrome. And I wanted to kind of incorporate some different styles. I was looking at some artists that do like hand sketches of architecture, and so I was just kind of drawing inspiration from there. And so my initial sketch, I wanted to create like a cityscape. So this is actually our portfolio of properties for the client. Included the Sun Center, some of these other buildings, basically everything in this except for the Hippodrome. But we kind of had to include the Hippodrome because it was right around there, and it created like something to put it into perspective. So the Hippodrome's super recognizable. Everyone knows what it is. So people will see that and be like, oh, that's downtown. So I created this by actually going in Google Maps, taking a bunch of screenshots of the different buildings that I needed to draw, and then I just basically sat there with it in front of my computer screen with a ballpoint pen and a piece of computer paper and just sketched them all out. And then afterwards, I stitched them together in Photoshop and then threw them into Illustrator. And the first drafts, I had a few different ideas. So the first two, I wanted to kind of play off that hand-painted sign idea and the old style of script and the whole hand-painted idea that you see on signs back in the 50s and stuff. And then my other design was incorporating the hand sketch. So yeah, after I stitched it together in Photoshop, I just threw it in Illustrator. I did an image trace. I know you normally don't do that, but for sketches and stuff like this, I feel like that's okay to do. That's the right time to do it, for sure. And my other idea was, since I just got the drone license at the time, was to take like a nice clean drone shot and colorize it into the background to kind of just show the whole encompassing area and just make it a little bit different. So that's just like a mock-up with Google Maps again. Then after meeting with our team and discussing it, everyone really liked the hand-painted sign text idea, and they also really liked the cityscape. So I created 3 different options of that, one with the original hand sketch, one with the like a flat design. It was like super detailed and stuff. Obviously this was still a rough draft. You can see I kind of just flipped the same thing on the other side. And then the third option was kind of an in-between, just the outlines themselves. And after meeting and discussing it, we came up with the hand sketch idea, just because downtown isn't this brand new thing. It's got character, it's old, it's been around for a while, so the whole hand sketch idea and the hand painted feel kind of really resonates with downtown Gainesville. So these are the 3 final signs. The top one is our standard single 4x8. Then this one is our 4x4 sign, and then this is our 4x4 wedge. So a 4x4 wedge is basically 2 4 feet by 4 feet signs butted up against each other in like a V shape. So both sides of traffic, both directions can see the sign. So instead of using the 4x4 twice like we would normally do, that would be too repetitive. So I created a primary panel and a secondary panel to where if you were driving by looking at it the whole time, you'd see the whole cityscape, or if you were looking at it directly in front of it, you'd also see the whole cityscape. So after that, sent off the PDFs to print, and I have to create install instructions. So we have a local guy that installs all of our signs. I don't personally get with a post hole digger and install signs. But instead of me like meeting him on site, because obviously I have a million things to do, I just create these quick instructions in PowerPoint actually, and just basically show him where to go, what signs to put, and how to put them. So these are supposed to be like basically a caveman can do it type thing. Like it has everything, he won't have any questions. And then after the install, these were some of the final signs. So they're still up, they're all over. We've got some big ones, some smaller ones. We have some on buildings, like into the brick and mortar, and it's a gratifying experience to spend, you guys know, to spend hours and hours on something and then to be driving around town and be like, oh, I did that. So,
Yeah.
But it doesn't end there. It doesn't have to end there. So we actually, I was able to use it in numerous places. So basically the whole hand sketch idea and the design of the sign was kind of like an evergreen content, something that you can use everywhere and it never kind of expires, never grows old. So we created some window decals, some window wraps for some of our storefront properties, which I had to have them measure the windows and the seams to make sure the text didn't overlap on the seams, because I didn't want our logo like obscured or anything like
Right.
that. And then we used the hand sketch to create some artwork for our new office. So I have all these posters in the new office, and we kind of created these big, long panels for it. And then, yeah, we've done banners, and it also led to another project for signage for Tioga Town Center. So we wanted to create kind of the same sort of branding, the same sort of feel. But my sketch was a lot cleaner. I took more time with it because, you know, Tioga is obviously more clean, more, you know, well put together. So, and we do property management for it. So I was like, you know, taking my time with the sketch. But we also use that for social media and for the blog. So we created a blog post, and it was able to be used digitally, in print, basically everywhere. So, you know, your projects don't really have to end with the final project. You can literally create anything out of the stuff that you've made. So just keep that in mind. Keep your Illustrator files. Don't delete them. And yeah, that's it. We're on social media. You guys can, I'm sure you've done a little research about us. You can check out our YouTube channel, see some of the videos. And we have an internship program. So if you guys or anyone you know is interested, you know, we're always looking to hire people on and get people involved. Our current marketing interns are marketing students at UF. So I don't really have that like backup for when I need, hey, I can't really throw, hey, I need 10 posters designed at someone who's a marketing major. But it would definitely be nice to have guys like you to back me up. And
That would be nice.
I'd be happy to teach you guys everything I know.
Everything? That is super.
Not everything.
He wants to keep his job. Thank you, Dustin. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to go ahead, and Jen, if you just introduce yourself, kind of tell your story.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen. I'm the current president of AIGA Gainesville. If you don't know what that is, it is the Professional Association for Design. I've got some flyers for y'all. We are the 72nd chapter. Recently, there's 73 chapters now. Tallahassee just started one.
Oh.
So Florida has the most chapters in the country now. We have 6. So we're killing it. But that means we have a good network for everybody to get involved with. We're very involved with the Orlando, Jacksonville chapters. So if you ever need a connection, we can hook you up. I'm also I started in November as the Marketing and Communications Director for the online master's programs at the College of Journalism at UF. That's still a new venture for me, but I keep ending up in marketing. And this department needed more of a systems approach to their brand and their communications, and I think designers lend themselves really well to systems and thinking in that way. So it's been a good fit for me. I'm also a graduate of the program, so I have a connection. I got my master's in web design from UF, and I'm also an adjunct instructor in the program, so I see every side of it.
Yeah. I
teach digital imagery and web design, so Photoshop, and we also cover like digital marketing campaigns and things like that. I figured I'd tell you a little of my story and then I've been hiring designers for the past few years, so I have some insight on portfolios, and we've had a ton of applicants for each position, so I've had to sort through them, what makes it more appealing than others. I figured we could talk about that.
Absolutely.
My story is a little interesting. So I went to undergrad in Idaho, the middle of nowhere. It was kind of a fun experience because I was so desperate for getting my hands on design work that I would barter a lot. So if I wanted coffee, I'd go to my favorite coffee shop and say, hey, you guys need a new logo? I need some coffee. Let's trade.
That's awesome.
And so that's how I would build my portfolio up, is I would do a lot of trade. I also, anytime there was a position within the school, within the college, I would yes, let me do that. So I worked in a dark room. I worked in a TV studio. I wanted to get involved in everything. I interned at an agency, a branding agency, and that's the only agency experience I've ever had. The rest of my career I've done in-house design, which is not what you typically envision yourself doing. You're in-house. I think it's a good pathway that people don't necessarily think about very often. So I started working, actually while I was still in school, I started working at a local magazine. Oh, Caesar's here. I started working at a local magazine publication, initially as an intern, and then the lead graphic designer quit, and suddenly I was the only one. And we had a 96-page glossy magazine to put out, and I had never done that before. So it was kind of a trial by fire. Learned a lot about preparing files for press really quickly. Not something I had a lot of experience with before that. So got my feet in there, kept chugging along. It was a community magazine, you know, about what's going on this month, and here's a local concert and festival. And it was kitschy, it was cute, but wasn't really what I wanted to be doing. We were in a college town, so we decided we needed something more focused on a younger population, and we actually started an alternative newspaper within the same company. And because it became my pet project, it was really up to me I was selling ads, I was editing stories, hiring writers, seeking submissions, and doing all of the layout, photography, art direction, you name it. That's a really great experience, but I wouldn't recommend it. You learn a little of everything. But it allowed me to get a job with the New York Times company doing layout. And I brought goodies to look at.
Oh, yay.
Because I like to look and feel.
Mm-hmm.
So I started working. I actually moved to Gainesville to work for the New York Times. If you don't know, there's actually an office here. There's about 45 employees, but they're no longer designers there, so I was the last one. So I started working primarily on the New York Times International Weekly, which is what I have here. So there were 36 papers that we would create a week, and about 4 designers and 7 editors. So they would vary in size. This is the tricky part about this job. So here's this, there's also different languages to deal with. Here's one tabloid paper, and here's another tabloid paper, but it's the same.
Is that? I was wondering if it was Serbian.
I was like, I can
She
read
speaks
that.
Serbian.
Yes.
Let us hear it.
That's awesome, because I couldn't read it.
So find the typos.
Yeah, we had Serbian editors. So this is the same layout and the same story on 2 different sized tabloid newspapers in different languages. So we would have to worry about every paper, all 36 were a different size. So we would have to resize and squeeze and edit all of the stories to fit each different newspaper. And sometimes the newspaper wouldn't want a certain story. Maybe it's too controversial for whatever country we were working in. This one I actually laid out. This is my design on the front page. I became in charge of all of these Spanish language publications, which were the majority of the International Weekly. We had 15 Spanish language newspapers. I don't fluently speak Spanish, so that meant that I was working with editors at every newspaper to make sure that they were working. So there's a lot of project management happening, which I think is a skill that is very important. Let's see, here's another example of size, because this one is a crazy size. This one is a huge sheet of paper.
Oh, cool.
And then this one is a smaller version of the same, but in French. So this was actually printed in Germany, and then this in France, but the same the same stories and imagery that we got from our editors in New York would have to go in here. So,
So why was there a size difference? Is it like country?
it depends on the newspaper and the press that they're running. So here, the Gainesville Sun prints the Ocala Star banner, and now the Jacksonville Times-Union, is that? They print all of that here. So all of those are the same size because they're running the same press. But they also print the Alligator, which is a different size, so they have the ability to print. It really depends on the press that they're using and the specific newspaper. If we could get some that were really close to each other, we were really excited because the changes were minimal. But we had some really tiny ones. There's one in Argentina we would print that I would just have to squeeze everything in. And then this giant German. This was the biggest one. It's really hard to not make a 5-column photo. That was always a trick. And the New York Times is so strict about its styling and its brand. I can tell you how much kerning is in each paragraph. I got to a point where I could skim a page and be like, you kerned out too much, go change that. Because we were trying to squeeze the stories in, but you could only you have to do a whole paragraph. You couldn't do just a line.
Right.
And you'd have to do either +10 or -10, and you couldn't do anything else. If you did anything else, we could all get to the point where we could tell.
I could see it, yeah.
The size of the headlines is intentional on every page. I think this one is probably 36, and then it goes 32, 28. And that tells you how important the story is on the page, but it's always the same on every one. So it didn't matter what language it was in, it still had to be the same size. I brought a few more. So here's Toronto, Canada. We would do the paper, and then we would also create a custom book review for them, which they were the only ones that we did that with. And this is my design as well for Mexico City. And that was the base paper that we actually used for everything. So if we could fit it on this paper, that was the base, and then we would take that and edit it for every other one. So add or subtract. And then I also did this design layout, and these are France. This is Rome, actually. So some of the European countries would print in English because they didn't get a lot of English-speaking publications, and that was what actually made it appealing to include in their newspapers, so that was nice. So I did this for a little over 3 years, and I decided newspaper design is probably not going to be around for me to keep doing. Decided to go to school while working and go into web design. And when I was halfway done with my degree, I ended up at the University of Florida, the Career Resource Center. I've actually had interns from this program work with me. I had Erin Porter, great intern.
You know Erin.
But new website, looking more at how to do the digital side of things. There's a lot of interest in app design, which I don't find very useful on a college campus, actually. But the interesting thing is there are a lot of designers who can do digital and not so much print. And if you can do both, like you saw his signage, he applied it to a window decal and then the website. If you can do both, I think that really makes you stand out a lot more as a candidate for a job. I think the principles are all the same of design, so it's not really that big of a deal.
I agree.
After I worked at the Career Center, I started working at UF Online, which is the online undergraduate degrees. This is actually the most recent piece. I'll share this with you too. The annual report, that's the last real thing that I worked on before I left to where I am now at the graduate level. So I've kind of I don't do as much production design anymore. I end up doing a lot more creative direction and art direction than anything. But this was such a, there's so much text in that it was a kind of an all hands on deck situation. So we had, with this, we would work with an agency for most of our work, but the annual report was all done in-house. So we had, I had a team of another full-time designer, and then we had 2 interns. We'd work together on it. But all of our bus ads, we have billboards all over the state of Florida. We have commercials, video. We actually worked with 160/90. And so I was like the liaison between the agency and the in-house team, which is, it's fun. But so I was doing heavy production work for many, many years, and now I'm kind of just supervising, which I think a lot of people are like, do you miss this? Sometimes. I mean, I do sometimes, but I think I get to kind of design my own life, kind of. You know, I get to decide how it works, and I think that's another way of looking at it. And then with AIGA, I get to design my own community, you know? Like, I want more designers in Gainesville. Let's hang out. So I like not the day-to-day production anymore, but sometimes I just have to find a fun project because I miss it. Also, I don't want my skills to get rusty.
Don't want that.
Yeah. I'm big on professional development and always learning too, so if we want to talk about that, I'm all about that. So that's my design story.
Thank you.
And if you guys want to look at this stuff, I've got it. I've got more UF stuff too, but you know, it's all orange and blue.
Yes, it is. Okay, so you had mentioned talking about interviews.
Yes.
Yeah. So have you done any interviews, Dustin, for to hire people on?
For interns, yeah.
Yeah, for interns. Okay. So yeah, so Jen, you said you had like 150 applications.
Yeah, so the last, I've posted 2 design positions in the past year, 125 applicants for one and almost 140 for another. It's a little overwhelming, but you quickly, when you're going through, learn what you like and what you don't like about a portfolio or a resume. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about what it is that makes that.
Can you share like do's and don'ts of portfolios?
I will say something that with a resume that people don't often think about is there's a good chance that you're going to be hired by a group of people, not one person, and that they're going to print that resume out and make copies of it. And if your resume doesn't print or photocopy very well, it doesn't look, it's not a good look. Because not everybody who's going to be interviewing you is a designer. Sometimes we want to get really fancy with things, and that's not always the best approach. Sometimes a clean sheet is the best way to get some attention. And so when I make my resume, and actually the person who hired me at the New York Times told me, I photocopied your resume and everybody could read it, so you moved to the top of the list. And so ever since she said that, I'm like, always. I will print it out and photocopy it on a bad thing and see if it still reads through. And if it does, then I'm happy with it. So that's something that I think is pretty interesting, because you think, oh, I need to show all my tricks, right? I need to show all the things I can do. Sometimes just making something that's simple to read and clean is the best approach.
I told him to consider the person who has the least technical knowledge is going to print your resume out.
They are, and they're going to, I can't read this. And they, it happens. A lot of times the designer will go through your portfolio or somebody with creative expertise, but your resume is going to be looked at by everybody, and usually non-designers. And so I think it's always smart to make sure that that's really clean and legible no matter what the situation is. Or when you're there in person, you can present a nicer color version of it, but make sure that it works in black and white and it works in a photocopier, and that it's not a weird size because they can't figure out printers. Make sure it's 8.5 by 11. I think that will get you a lot further than you probably think. And then with portfolios, I like to see a variety of work, but often you can tell if you have a favorite thing. We talked earlier, you like cars. We can tell if you have a favorite thing. If you're applying for a specific job and you don't have feelers out on a lot of them, you're just looking for this one, sometimes it's nice to tweak your portfolio to say, I'm really good at layout and I can do newspapers, and highlight that more. If you're applying for a lot of jobs at once, probably just a good range, but if you've put one in one place and they're the only people really looking at your portfolio at the time, tailor it to who you're showing it to.
So is there anything else, like out of the 140 applicants, like, is there anything that stood out to you? What would that be?
So it's a university, so that people think, oh, I have to have a bachelor's degree or I have to have a degree in design. And for some positions at a university, you absolutely do. Out of the 150 for the UF Online position, I hired somebody that doesn't have a degree at all. And I had to really fight for him because I said he's the best person, he's got the most skills, and he's turned out amazing work. And what really stood out to me was that he had some little, we were looking for someone who doesn't do what I do, basically. And so if you look at who already works in the office and you can see, okay, this is their wheelhouse, highlight the work that is not that. So he could do big, large format installations and wall graphics, and we were doing a ton of bus ads and bus wraps, and he had a technical knowledge with printers about how to work with that I just didn't have. And so he really highlighted that when in the interview, I said, I don't really understand these things, and this is what I'm looking for. And he busted out some technical jargon that I was like, this guy knows what he's talking about. I had a lot of people, I always ask a question, like, where do you find inspiration and where do you go to learn more? And that's always a question I ask in interviews. And if you say Pinterest, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. Like, that was a no. I know so many people said that. And the way I feel about looking for design on Pinterest is it's good if you're looking for an idea. I'm browsing but to say that that's where you go to like learn about things and process, you're never going to learn about somebody's design process on Pinterest. You just see the final product, and then all you're doing is copying. You're not learning the history behind it or why choices were made a certain way, or oh, this is a Swiss-inspired design. You don't know that if you don't actually dig a little deeper. And so Pinterest, to me, when people say that, no. And I had a lot.
That's so funny.
I had a lot of people say that. So I would, when there's that many applicants, I actually sent like a survey to some people to start whittling it. I got it down to 40 who all had great portfolios. I sent a survey, can you answer these questions for me? And some of them were, where do you find inspiration? What do you like working on? Because I think that's important to know about somebody. If they're really passionate about something, you're going to get a better product about it. And if they had answers that just weren't thoughtful, like you could tell that they actually thought about it and said, okay, this is the company that I'm interviewing with, and I can tell this is what they need, then I just didn't move them on to the next round or phone interviews.
I never heard about that method, the survey. This was before the interview?
Before the phone interview. I did a questionnaire, whittled it down. I did 20 phone interviews, which is still a lot.
That's a lot.
And then from the phone interviews, I was able to get it down to 5 in person. So the phone interview is clearly important.
You knocked out 3/4 of.
Yes, and some of it was, they answered the phone. They're clearly in a very noisy place, or they weren't really paying attention. And in the interview, I said, take a look at the job description. And if I would say something about the description, those job descriptions are very thoughtfully written, and you might not have all of the skills on that job description. Don't be afraid to apply for something just because you don't have all of the skills. But if you say, I really want to learn more about X, I think that shows that you're willing to jump in and do something that maybe you're not the most comfortable, but you still want to learn about. So if I would say something like, well, in the job description I mentioned blah, 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 and if they had no idea, well, you didn't do your research, so.
Right.
Yeah.
So the phone interview then wasn't necessarily about you understanding more about their skills or anything, it was more kind of
A little of
seeing
both.
It is, yeah. I mean, my experience with phone interviews is the same. It's a little of both, but you're starting to figure out if they're going to fit your culture.
Yeah.
Like, so that's like your first real interaction with them. Like, are they going to fit with who we are? And
Yeah.
and then ethics comes up into it. I don't know if y'all do that too. Like, where you ask a question just to see what they're going to say.
Well, especially for us, a state institution, we have a lot of rules that we have to follow. And UF Online is legislatively mandated, and so it has a lot more. It's under a lot of scrutiny. Our emails are read all the time by everybody. We never know about it. So what if you're gonna, you're in this situation where somebody asks you to do something, and you're not really sure what should you do. If they don't, answer that in a way that would fit with what the office would really need. I mean, the question is, if you're not sure, ask. That's the answer. If you're not sure, I would ask my supervisor. That's always, but if you just go up, well, I think I would just not do it. Well, you should probably ask somebody.
Yeah. One of the things that's really big for us when we were interviewed is that because we were interviewing for faculty, and so you ask about classroom situations and stuff. If they mention a student by name, that is a big, 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 big problem ethically. And so, I mean, that's just, and we're asking a question sincerely because we want to know the answer, but if they then pinpoint a particular student by name, it's like, oh, wait, you knew this was an interview, right?
And I'll do the same with like if they're talking about a previous employer.
Oh, yeah.
Because you don't want somebody who's going to trash talk you if they're unhappy.
Right.
And
that's a good point.
And that happens a lot in interviews. Well, at this job, it's just crazy. And it might be. You might be in a situation where it's just not good for you, but to go and talk poorly about what you're doing and who you're working for doesn't look good for you.
Mm-hmm. What are your tips?
Well, my tips probably are on more of the interviewee side. So I did numerous interviews, and not trying to brag, but all the interviews that I went through led to something, whether it was not the job and some some freelance work or stuff like that. But yeah, the main thing is research the company. Like if you don't take the time to look into the company and just read their mission statement, look at their website, stuff like that, like they immediately just throw you out. Because if you're like, oh, well, what do you like about our company? And you're like, like
so you got a job opening.
You're out. Like, and then like she was saying, the job description. So what I always did is I read through the job description, and they have the required things like you need to know this, and if you know this is a plus. So I'd look through all that, and if there's anything that I didn't know what it was, I'd Google it. So one of the things like they had at the time, I didn't know what MailChimp was. Mm-hmm. It was back then, and so I looked it up. I was like, it was like one of the things, do you know MailChimp type thing? And so I looked it up. I was like, oh, it's like a thing for sending out mass emails. And I just did a little research about it, and I knew what it was. So then in the interview, they're like, are you familiar with MailChimp? And I was like, yes, actually, I'm familiar with MailChimp, but I've never had to use it because I don't have tens of thousands of emails to send at once. Mm-hmm. But that kind of showed, like, not to BS or anything, but if you look up something, then you know what it is, then you're technically familiar with it.
Yeah.
So
you had awareness.
That helps.
But you were honest in your answer,
mm-hmm,
too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I do know what it is. I haven't used it.
Exactly.
Because I haven't had a need for it.
Exactly.
So it's a very honest
mm-hmm.
answer.
And that the same in my new role. We have Salesforce, which is a huge software system, and I've used it for creating emails as a designer with UF Online, I would go in and create the emails, but to actually do all of the marketing reports and all of that, I hadn't done that. And in this position, they said, well, what do you think, one of the questions in my interview was, what do you think you would struggle the most with coming into this position? And it was, well, your brand is all sorts of crazy. We need to fix that. But also, and they liked that. But Salesforce, I'm not that familiar. I would need training on that. And they said, well, are you willing to go into these trainings? Absolutely. I'll do whatever you need. I'm willing to learn it. But I will be upfront, I need training on this. And they were happy with that answer. They hired me over somebody who knew Salesforce back and forth because I had the other skills that that person didn't have. So I think being honest about it, but I looked everything up. Yes, how, does Salesforce do this? It has capabilities I still don't fully understand, and I'm still learning, but I was willing to say, like, I'm familiar, but I don't have those skills yet. Yet.
Also, another thing just to add, not only should you research the company, you should research who's like interviewing you.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there was a position that I was applying for, and I did some research about the person who was interviewing me. Found out that, hey, they're working as a graphic designer, but their degree isn't in graphic design. They're marketing major and stuff like that. So when they're like, hey, what would you like to learn from this? The wrong answer would be, hey, I'd like to learn more about graphic design. The right answer would be, hey, yeah, I have an extensive background in graphic design, but, I'd like to learn a little bit more about marketing and how to apply it in your field and stuff like that. So that's something to really look at as well.
Very
So
good.
dig deep.
Okay, questions?
I have a comment. I think it's interesting that you said that you should look at what whoever's interviewing you or whoever will be your boss or whatever, what they can't do. Because when I've been thinking about jobs and where I fit in, it's been, well, how does my design mimic theirs? Or like, how are they similar? I think that's interesting because I never thought, like, what are they lacking? And how
Right.
can I bring that to them?
Yeah,
And
that's why they're hiring you, is because they don't have something. It's not because they already know how to do it. And so I do think that that's a way that you should kind of approach it. I think showing that you can fit in to the company's culture and that your style, while it might not look like theirs, you're very adaptable is a good way to do things. But yeah, you really have to look at what they're lacking and what you can bring to the table that they don't already have. And I think if you can highlight that in a phone interview, in an interview, that's going to make you a much stronger candidate.
I think it's harder for like ad agencies. I just assume that they've got it all. They already have everything. They just need another pair of hands, basically.
And sometimes they do. And if you're willing to say, I'll do whatever, I'll try this and I'll adapt. I think that's a good way to approach an agency, but also they can't keep doing the same old thing at an agency especially. They have to look at things in a new and fresh way and innovate, or they're not going to get new clients, or they're not going to get a new campaign off the ground. So if you can say, I love what you're doing, I really think it would be cool if we could add, I think that's a good approach there as well. They don't want the same old thing to present to clients, and so if all of their stuff looks exactly the same, then their clients aren't going to be happy either.
Right. I also thought Dustin brought up a good point about the wrong answer. Like, why do you want to work here? Well, I want to improve my graphic design skills.
Right.
Like, no. Yes, you do want to do that, but that's not why you should want to work there. And so
Tell them why.
Yeah, tell them
Tell
really,
them
like, you should have a real reason why you want to work there. Anywhere you're going, you should be improving your skills in some facet.
Right.
But why do you want to work there?
You're going to learn something at every job.
Yep.
But what makes this one more appealing than
Right.
another one? And like, he never thought he was going to work in real estate, right?
Exactly.
I didn't think I was going to work at a university. But
I mean, I didn't think I was going to be a professor.
right. Yeah, adjunct lecturer is not at the top of my list. But learn a lot from students. I think that helps me as a designer. But also I have to be current and I have to know what I'm talking about. And AIGA is really, I got a really cool poster in the mail from Paula Scher and AIGA the other day. Yeah, so I'm telling you, good things happen.
BFF.
We're like this. Life goals.
Right. Absolutely.
But staying current on things so that if something comes up, you can talk about it at least, or say, you know, I heard about this. I'd love to look into this for you. I think is really important. Like I said, Pinterest is not really the place, but there are a lot of places. Under Consideration is a really great blog to look at. And they have brand new and the brand new conference as well.
When I started the conference, I was like, oh, they're great people. I mean, of course their conference is going to be amazing.
So it's run by a husband and wife. The husband used to be a designer at Pentagram in New York, and Brioni Gomez Palacio is the wife. She actually was here in Gainesville a few months ago talking about her whole process, and she's obsessive. Like, she has an Excel sheet that maps out the next 5 years of her life.
Oh, my goodness.
And that, I know, it was really, she planned when she was going to have children based on the work that they were doing in the agency. I'm going to get pregnant here and I'm going to do this. I was fascinated, but that's not how I operate.
Yeah,
and so that, I have no idea what's going to happen. But the brand new conference works because they are this obsessive and they create really unique experiences. And I think that's another thing. If you can do something that's really out of the box and unique, I know like a lot of leave behinds. I've never asked for a leave behind, but if somebody does something in an interview and leaves a really unique piece and thoughtful, I do think that's a nice touch.
What's the most thoughtful, cool one you've seen?
So we actually had somebody bring us, so after the interview they left and then came back, they had made cards for each person in the office and specifically said something about the conversation they had with that person and they said something about, I really appreciate your insights. It was like a nice personalized message, and that I think was the best one. If it was just like I've seen a lot of people do like a box of candy or something, which I think is fun, but the personalized, I was listening to you and I heard what you said and I really appreciate it. I think that was more meaningful, not only to me, but the non-designers in the office, who don't understand what goes into a package design.
That's true.
They might think it's really easy for you to do that, but the personalized note meant something a little more. But they had made the cards too, it was all hand lettered. It was very nice, but it was more about the message and the personalization, I think.
So back to having things that they're looking for. Let's say you've researched the company and you can do the things that they do, and you can do it efficiently, but you're not really sure where they're headed. Is it appropriate to ask them like what kind of things they're looking for and where they're headed?
I think that would be a great interview question. If you come with good questions, that sets you apart. And I think that's a good question because it shows that you want to do more and you want to do it with them. I mean, I've had a lot of interviews where people I say, do you have any questions for us? And they're like, no, I think you answered everything.
Always have questions.
Always have questions. And that one, where do you see this office, where do you see this company going, and how do you think I can help you get there? I think that's a good question because then they have to think about you fitting into it, and it will lead to them thinking about you being there, So no, I think that's a great question.
To kind of go back to staying current, is there a way that you guys stay current?
I tend to look at like design trends of 2018 and then also just browsing AIGA's website. Also Behance, I go through there all the time just looking at stuff. And a lot of the times when I'm working on a project, I also like Google stuff. So say I'm doing something, I Google it, and if I see a bunch of the same thing, I'm like, okay, that's what's cliche. Let me not do that.
Exactly.
And then books, like I get a lot of books.
I'm a book person.
Mm-hmm.
Every design book I can get my hands on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And not just design books. Like for me, like when I first started there, they like put all this social media stuff on me, and then I was like, okay, let me learn more about this. So I got a couple books on social media. Just started learning, other people's strategies behind certain things and how the algorithms work and how to like cater towards that. Come to find out, one of the books that I got was kind of outdated, and the algorithms have completely changed.
Yes. They
But-
changed last week.
That's
Yeah.
the hard part about social media books.
But I learned kind of their thought process and how they did things, so that definitely helps.
I have a question. What is the everyday life at the office like when you get there? How do you start your day?
Well, every day is different for me because we have so much stuff, so many different things. So I actually I don't know if you guys are familiar with Trello. So I have my own Trello board, and anytime I get an email, anytime I get a project, anytime someone tells me, hey, we need this, I throw it in Trello card, it's basically like virtual sticky notes. So I just have everything. I have like high priority, medium priority, low priority, and I kind of organize it, and then you can tack on due dates and stuff like that. So I'm kind of my general workflow is like, okay, this is what I need to do, this is what I can do, and this is what needs to be done at some point. And I'm kind of just dragging stuff to complete it and just working through everything that I need to get done.
How many projects do you take on at a time?
It depends. So
And your in-house is different.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we have listings, we have properties that we need to market. So sometimes, we'll have 2 to 3 listings a month. Sometimes I'll have 25 in a week. So, sometimes I have to so I make brochures for each one. And I have to create aerials to show where the property is and all the retailers around it. So sometimes that's all I do for an entire week. And sometimes, I do a couple of those and, hey, we need a drone video. So go on site, flying the drone, and then sometimes, hey, we need 10 posters by tomorrow. So I'm there till like 9 o'clock working on stuff. And so it really depends. But yeah, I definitely kind of have dabbled in everything. And sometimes you have to juggle like a bunch of different things that kind of don't go with each other at all. Sometimes I'll be like creating an Excel spreadsheet for like a market report, and then also working on like icons for the blog. So you kind of never know. It's kind of like stuff just gets thrown at you, and you just got to prioritize things. That's the biggest thing, is prioritizing stuff.
Did you mention your inspiration points?
My inspiration. AIGA, yeah. So AIGA actually sends out quite a few emails of design news. There's one called Eye on Design, where it's like a curated, here's what's happening kind of thing, and I actually really enjoy those, and that was before I had anything to do with AIGA. I was really into that. As I've gotten a little more into it, I really enjoy going to conferences or meetups and talking to other professionals and seeing what they're doing. I'm actually teaching a professional development course for our graduate students, and I really encourage networking and going and talking to people, because sometimes you'll find out somebody's working on some really cool project you would have never heard about, and that you can somehow get involved. And I think happenstance is a nice way to stumble onto a new design love. I have a lot of design books and art books, and I use them when I'm doing research for a new project. So let's say I need to create a poster for something. I'll look through what other people have done and kind of pull inspiration. Sometimes it leads down a rabbit hole of like, oh, I really want to learn about, I'll mention it again, Swiss design. And I really like...
You're in safe company.
I really like Joseph Mueller-Brockman, and I'm going to keep going down this hole. And but conferences have been a really interesting place for me to learn about things I wouldn't have otherwise. I learned a lot about representation in design, and making sure that as the designer you are making imagery that is more representative of than yourself and a larger group of people, because it is important that other people see themselves in products. Inclusion and diversity in the workplace has become a real focus of design, and the ethics behind it, and thinking about those things for me, where that's not necessarily something you would learn in class and in school, but once you get out and you start talking to other people, it really becomes a bigger issue. Where else? I said under consideration. I'm on there a lot. They post reviews of new brands and new logos they'll show you the old stuff. Sometimes they're scathing, and but I think that's always good. And then I follow a ton of designers on Twitter and Instagram. Design Twitter is an interesting universe, because becoming design famous is like, it's really weird. But then you go to a conference and you see, Michael Beirut, and you get to talk to Michael Beirut. Like, that's really cool. And that kind of inspires me to keep digging and find other designers. Did you went to the New Orleans conference?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I saw all of you in New Orleans.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think
was a really good one.
It was a really great conference, and everything was beautiful, and just like the signage sometimes.
The aesthetic, like, what I have lots of recordings of, like, I don't remember who made it, but
the graphics.
The graphics at the beginning,
Yeah.
and it wasn't the ones that were the brand of the
Right.
conference. It was the black and white ones.
Yeah.
Oh my!
Yeah.
I was just like, I've never shown them to you. I've got them probably on my phone.
I think they're on YouTube too.
Yeah, they're just gorgeous, and just the fact that it made me think, like, different. Which is what design should do. Like, when you're looking at stuff and being inspired by it, and especially a conference should do that.
Right. Yeah.
What conference was it?
Hmm?
What conference was it?
AIGA 2015, New Orleans.
Yeah.
I might not have it on this phone.
Dang, it was that long ago.
It was that long ago.
Yeah.
Was
So
it
I've been.
2015?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was 2015.
I went to that one. That was my first AIGA conference, because it was close enough to drive. And then
Yeah, I had to drive it.
I went to the Las Vegas one after that, and then I went recently to Minnesota. So, but that's led to, there's a Creative South conference in Columbus, Georgia. I just got back from that a few weeks ago. Highly recommend it. And this was my first year at that, but it was more of an illustrator. There were a lot of illustrators there, which is not my wheelhouse, but I was so fascinated to learn
Right.
from. But there's a lot of the business of design that you start learning at these conferences, people giving you advice on freelancing and money and contracts that you can't always learn in an academic environment. I mean,
One of the things I liked is, like, if you go eat somewhere, like, they give you recommendations for places to eat. Well, everybody who's there practically is also other designers, and sometimes there's just not room at another table, so they'll seat you together with people you don't even know. Be like, okay, yeah, well, yeah, we're all at the same conference, sure. And so then you have conversations with people from all over the nation. And as a professor, I was talking about it to my students. Like, hey, you should be keeping an eye on Santa Fe College.
I like the I'm a Stranger thing they did for the Photoshop wall.
Yes.
That was awesome.
Yeah, where you had a meetup, like they had dinner together with like people who didn't know each other from the
so
conference.
we do that. We have a retreat as a board of AIGA with other AIGA chapters in Florida, and we purposefully sat people at dinner with people they didn't know, and we assigned seats. We're like, we're going to this restaurant, and everybody had their little group, and then we're like, and you sit over here, because you do learn so much more when you talk to people you wouldn't normally talk to. And so I'm not an illustrator, but there were so many great illustrators at Creative South that now I have people I can work with if I need something, like, oh, you make these really cool flat design illustrations and I need it for this project, can we collaborate? I think collaborating with people, you don't often think about that when you're thinking about your portfolio. You know, I'm going to create all these pieces and they're just mine. But when you start working with other people who have different skill sets, different strengths, you can make really cool stuff. And as long as you're giving credit to everybody, that's still your work and that's still your portfolio. I don't think that that's a bad thing to show that you can collaborate ever.
No. And they've had to collaborate on a couple projects. Okay, more questions? Very good. Very good. We're done, all right.
As an in-house designer or director, you ever get burnt out? Like, it sounds like you got all kinds of different stuff. You can't be interested in all of that. Like, as a designer, like that's just part of the job. I'm sure there could be things. Like, do you ever get burnt out? And how do you, not necessarily get new creative ideas, but how do you not hate your job?
I think, and for me, I mean, currently, yeah, I work, 40 hours a week in-house, and then I also do freelance stuff, so on weekends I'm doing stuff for other people, just trying to make, some extra money and stuff like that. So I think for me personally, it's just having a balance of your social life and, like, spending time just away from the computer, away from the desk, kind of helps me when I go back to work and when I do stuff. And like it sucks, but I don't do anything for myself anymore, which sounds like it sucks, but like if I was doing 40 hours a week at work and I was doing stuff on the side and I was doing like, hey, I want to design this because I like this for myself, like I think then I would definitely get burnt out. But I kind of have a balance, and kind of an outlet. So for me, it's cars. So when I'm not at work, I'm with my buddies. We're working on cars. We're racing, going to events and stuff like that. So it's kind of like pull yourself out of it. Don't always be in something because you will burn yourself out, and then you'll hate what you're doing.
Last week, April Schroeder and Hector were here from Liquid, and she said have a different creative interest, or a different interest outside of design.
Not design. Yeah. I mean, I work at the University of Florida, and I get really tired of orange and blue. And the interesting thing is now I'm like, okay, well, how can I use orange and blue in a more creative way? It's become my new thing. Like, let's tweak this. But, yeah, I mean, you can get really burnt out. At the New York Times, I was burnt. And I was working overtime every week, and I was, it's newspaper layout. It's very black and white, and it's the same brand, and it doesn't stray too much. And so I would try and find other things, even at work, to get involved in that weren't necessarily me sitting there. And so, like, they had an employee committee for, the office. I would get involved in that, and then that takes me out of that, thinks of new things that can help the office, and then I sit back down. And so anything I can do to pull myself out, like you said, away from the desk is good. But I think when you get into design, you have like, I really want to make this, and it's because I love it. And I still think that way sometimes, but I don't create projects for myself either. I used to do a lot of freelance for bands. I would do band posters and social media images, and that's because I was really interested in music. But they don't pay very well. So if you're devoting freelance time to something, you usually want to make it worth your while. So I'll do freelance for Sharp Spring or other places in town. It's still not a creative outlet, so I've got to find something not design related. Right now for me, that is AIGA, and I'm not designing when I'm doing AIGA, but I'm connecting people and going to these different events, and that brings me inspiration a lot of times. Listening to what other people are doing and their stories is very helpful for me, and say, oh, I could take that and apply this to what I'm doing and solve some problems. But I don't have a lot of free time. Like right now, I have my 40-hour-a-week job, usually more than that, and then I teach on top of that, and then I do AIJ, and I have kids. So it's I'm never not busy, and I like that. If I've got downtime, I don't know what to do. But a non-design creative outlet is important. And creative is subjective. You can do a lot of things creatively. It doesn't have to be making art.
Right.
I had a question. You said you had worked a little bit as an agency, and I know you have a lot of experience, you both have experience in-house. Just in terms of the different maybe experiences or expectations within those worlds, like, I don't know, can you speak to that?
In-house, I think you're going to be, you're focused on one brand typically, and you're going to probably do more things for that brand than you would do at an agency. I think at an agency the roles are more clearly defined. Typically, an art director does this, a copywriter does this, where at in-house you might be doing all of that. And if you are not that type of person, it may not be the best. I like to try new things, and I like to do as much as I possibly can. And so in-house has worked really well for me. But I know that it's not for everybody. Also, how do you keep from getting tired with the same brand all the time? I just keep my eye out for any opportunities that come. Like, you don't normally think about looking for jobs unless you need a job. I always keep my eye on job postings. Oh, this looks interesting. Because you never know what's going to come up. And if something looks perfect for you, it lands in your lap, it happens. But always keeping your options open, always keeping your eyes on things, but you're going to do more in-house. He's in marketing, I'm in marketing. I think marketing and design go hand in hand. I don't know that designers are always the best at marketing themselves.
It's been excruciating.
Yes. And when people ask me, like, can you tell us about yourself? I'm always like,
we talked about that. You just need to write down 3 things you want to say.
yeah. I'm still not. If you said what are 3 things we should know about you, like, I'm not the best at that, but I can tell you what's great about you, and I can. And sometimes that's all people want to hear.
I would love to tell you about myself, but let me tell you about you first.
I love this about you. That's about me.
Awesome.
It's a hard thing to market yourself, to do the business end of it, and still feel like you're accomplishing good design work. But it's all important, and it all works together, which is why I think so many designers find themselves in marketing positions or within marketing departments, is because once you kind of understand the reason behind something, you understand the path to push it out to people. And as a designer, you have to think about the user and not always the client, which is an agency, you're pleasing the client. You're creating work for the client. And sometimes you really have to advocate for the user a lot more than you do in-house. I think in-house, that's the idea. We do this for the user. For an agency, you're doing this for the client who thinks it's for the user. And so there's an extra layer of explanation or even advocacy that you have to deal with.
I think to add to that for the client versus the brand and stuff like that, so we do a lot of stuff with, so this is our client and this is our brand, so sometimes, the client will ask for something that's outside of our brand. For example, like the headers on all of our brochures are all lowercase, and sometimes they'll be like, hey, can you capitalize this? And we have to be like, no, actually, that's a design choice, that's our branding. And sometimes you have to tell the client no, like you have to kind of work both sides and be like, well, they want this, but this is what we do, can this work? And if not, you just have to be able to explain that in a way that shows them that, hey, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and this is why we shouldn't do this type thing. So
any other pressing questions? Y'all are our last session for the semester. A week and 1 day from today is their exhibition. They're graduating. Okay, so one of the things we talk about that's been an interesting topic is, you know what I'm saying? is what to wear to an interview. So for most of them, like the creative industry is new to them. You know, so interview style. Now, you don't know Dustin's. He's got a really cool style of attire, not his work attire, but his regular daily attire, and he's really spiffy. So yeah, he's very spiffy. So we had quite a range in his group. His Vulcan was like, you know, looked like a European prince.
Right. Yeah. I remember that group.
Yeah. And then you had Erin,
Yeah.
who's like, I love to climb rocks.
Yes. Lots of rock climbing.
Yes. Lots.
Yeah.
She's doing it just about every day now.
Yeah.
In Colorado. Okay, so what would you say are things you wouldn't want to see, and things you would like give a recommendation for? Like, here's how you dress for a creative position interview.
I think for an interview, it's always better to overdress than underdress, because the day-to-day attire might be different when you actually get into the office, but if it shows that you put in some thought and a lot of effort when you're coming to this interview and that you're taking it seriously, I think that's important. At my current workplace, I think it's a little, like, people wear full suits and bring in portfolios in briefcases, which is always jarring for me because that's not my attire. And I'm more dressed up now than I normally am. So, but as I've actually moved up in my position, I've had to really adapt what I'm wearing and take it more seriously. And so I always think overdress for the interview, business professional. I mean, I don't think a full suit is necessary in almost any, unless you're applying for a management and executive position. But, you know, a nice business professional outfit. I wouldn't do too business casual. I would go a little above that, just to show how serious you are. And then that won't likely be your day-to-day apparel, but for interviews, I definitely take it up a notch.
So does that include jeans?
No.
Ha!
You have a really nice dark denim.
Dark, black, that's fine.
Yeah,
I would
see?
not.
See? Dark or
Black would be fine. Never blue. Like at UF, we're not allowed to wear jeans in most offices, unless it's Friday before football.
Because football
But-
rains.
Yes, there are certain offices where I've worked in where jeans are never allowed. We had a no denim rule when I worked at the Career Center, and that's because companies are coming in and interviewing students for jobs, and the students are dressed in full suits. And so if the employees are not, so it was a tough adjustment for me coming from a newsroom where I could wear jeans and a hoodie because it's cold to here we are in the Career Center. I would never wear jeans unless they're black to an interview. But, I mean, I wear black everywhere, so I think that's the designer uniform.
So we have similar agreements on that.
She's always got nice shoes.
And accessories is a really useful thing. Like that shows a little personality.
Yeah, I always have I don't today, I always do. I always have an interesting necklace or interesting shoes. I don't have either of those things today, but
She's not interviewing us.
I feel like I am. No, I'm just but I've gotten comments like, oh, I love those shoes before, and then it leads to a more personal conversation. Oh, I got them here, you know, and they get to know you a little on a personal level. So don't get rid of your individuality.
Right.
I can't talk. But I would take it up a notch and not wear jeans.
I think, in the same thing. What I did is I would kind of learn about what they wear. So if they wear business casual, I want to, step it up just a little bit. So, you want to think of what you would wear every day to work there and do it one step higher. So, your interview, so, for example, where I work now, they wear kind of like business attire. We can wear jeans every once in a while type thing. It used to be jeans day every Friday, but then
See, it's not just football.
they got more lax on it, and then they're like, okay, you can wear jeans throughout the summer, and then now it's like, okay, you can wear jeans whenever. But I still wouldn't wear jeans in that regard. I actually wore a suit to my interview.
I would expect
it never
nothing
hurts.
less.
Yeah, it never hurts.
He's a spiffy dresser.
He is a spiffy dresser.
So he took it up a notch. The interesting thing too is being on the interviewer side is a lot of times our panel of people who are going to be interviewed will dress up because you're coming in, and so that's something to think about.
That's true.
As we know we're going to be interviewing you, we're all going to dress up a little nicer because we want you to think how professional we are. But so if you have already stepped it up, then you're on par. Because, yeah, when you were talking about that, I'm like, yeah, but we all dress up. So, yeah.
Yeah, if we have like a big client or something, like we'll use Slack for internal communication, but sometimes our boss will be like, no jeans, we have a big client coming in, please dress up. So in that same regard, yeah.
Anything else? This is the last ones.
I guess, okay, like, I have a phone interview tomorrow, so. kind of
Yay,
thinking about
congratulations.
that. And I'm wondering, like, if there's one thing you've heard specifically on phone interviews where you're like, this person, yes, you know, or, this person, no.
Noise. If it's noisy, I'm just like, apparently they don't
Yeah.
care.
So kick the dogs out, okay.
Yeah, the noise. I think it's always good to have like stuff pulled up in front of you to reference because you're not like the pausing with the ums is really evident over the phone, much more so than in person. So watch that. And now I did it.
But you're in person, so it's okay.
Yeah, exactly. The noise, make sure you've got a quiet spot. When I worked at the Career Center, the career counselors would actually tell the students, dress up like you're going to an in-person interview because you feel different and you talk differently.
I do that just in case they decide to say, oh, well, let's get on Skype.
Which I've had a Skype interview, yes, and dress like you're going in there. Act like you're going in, and you'll sound like that's what's happening. It's just kind of how you adapt to things. So dress accordingly. I think that helps out more than you would think. Make a quiet space.
It can be hard on phone interviews because you don't have face-to-face. And so if there's dead space, you feel like you have to fill it.
You don't. With the that's yeah, it happens
And
a lot.
it's like ramblings. I mean, I know I can ramble, but in a phone interview, I was very, like, any phone interview, I'm very clear about, do not ramble, Shauna, do not ramble. Do not ramble.
And if you have some things that you want to highlight, make sure you have those written down in front of you so that you remember to talk about those important things to you.
Especially when it's the thing that you're like, I really feel like this is the key to why they should get me and why I should go there. So, because you'll forget. The nerves will get in the way and you'll just, no matter how good you're doing, you might forget to do those things. I'm trying to think of any other
Fingers
phone.
crossed for
I
tomorrow.
mean, I've been on both sides of the phone interview too, so it's just kind of like, you want to make sure you have a good connection. Don't be driving down 8th Avenue because you're going to lose your drop your call.
It happened to me once. They called early and I was driving. And so I turned all the noise I possibly could, and I turned it on speaker. I'd set it down and was talking like this. I was very.
But that's a good point. Be ready early because sometimes they will call early.
They called a half hour early.
That's a lot early.
I know. I don't know what happened. I got the job, so. But the noise, background noise is definitely something to consider. If they can't hear you and hear your answers, then.
I've had so many people call, like when we call them, they're like a coffee shop or something.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, it's normally quiet in here, but now listen, I've done phone interviews in Panera before, like where I had to, like I was the one being interviewed, and I was out of town. Like the hotel was too far away from like between appointments that I had, and so I had to find somewhere. I staked out Panera for 2 days. I was there for like 4 days or something. I stayed out Panera for 2 days to figure out when's it gonna be quiet. Wait, where can I get a spot? And I was there like 2 hours early, got my spot, made sure nobody could be behind me or around me. It was just like, I made it really serious. Like I was very serious about this because I wasn't gonna have a lot of control over my environment. So I tried to make it as controlled as possible.
You can also find a library. A lot of times they have rooms that you can rent
That's a good point.
that are, you know, it's free. It's just a small little workroom. You
I've
do
locked
your
myself in the
Skype
car.
interview there,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, if your
Yeah,
house
Skype
doesn't
interview.
look professional or whatever.
Yeah, if you're doing Skype, make sure you see what's in the background.
I pull up FaceTime, or not FaceTime. I'll do FaceTime, but I also do the photo
The photo booth
Yeah,
to see what it looks like.
because it gives you like the whole thing. Okay, so how's the lighting? How's like all those things? Just
I'll
test
often
everything.
turn it so the only thing behind me is a wall.
Yep. So then I only have to clean that part.
Yep. and I teach online, and I have a live class, so that I have the same thing. They can see whatever room I'm in. I face the wall. Turn the computer so there's nothing. And there's nothing to distract anybody if you're doing that. They can't learn about your house.
Right.
Which the work environment really shouldn't anyway.
Right.
So you keep it professional.
Yeah. Agreed.
My cats are just.
So you close the door.
When I was a student, I had a lot of instructors. You'd suddenly see a cattail. and then the classmates would be like, "Oh, kitty!" And they hold it up.
I have
But-
one who has 2 dogs, and she's my advisor as well. And so like we have a Skype. We always Skype. We're talking, and she's like, "Oh, the kids, her dogs, they're going after a lizard or something."
Yeah,
I don't care.
dog barking is not a
I
great.
just need my questions answered.
Yeah. Our office, when we were interviewing, it always turned to the talk of dogs. It always did. And somebody was like, "I don't like dogs," and the whole office went, "Don't say that. Don't say that." And then she goes, "I don't like cats either, if that helps." You just alienated the other half. They did hire her, so I will say
At least
she
it
had
was-
other credentials.
It was a good backup. Like, well, oh, very. They didn't like that. I don't like cats either. That's funny.
Right.
Okay, I think that's it.
I got a question though.
Oh, okay, go ahead, Sarah.
I was wondering during interviews, like, do you pay attention to body language and like eye movement?
Yeah, I do. I had one person I was interviewing that kept like leaning in like this, and all of us would go, like it was really we were like, why is he doing that? And he kept calling us dude as well. It was a room full of women. Dude. And so that became a kind of a funny thing around the office. We'd go, hey, dude. So yeah, don't
Don't become the office joke.
Right.
Right. It's hard sometimes to make eye contact with somebody. You're in a pressure-filled situation. You're more nervous than you probably should be. I think it's important to try and look at somebody. If you can't make eye contact, like look at their forehead or something. But a lot of fidgeting and looking down. People can usually tell if you're nervous, and they'll give you the benefit of the doubt in that situation. But if you have a weird tick, like, try and sit on your hands or something to control that. Because, yeah, we seriously didn't bring him for another interview because of the dude situation.
I bet he was trying to look like he was relaxed and like.
I think so.
You know, he just failed.
Well, I think he was trying to be relaxed, but the dude was a regular part of his. Like, he would just say it. Yeah, that's just how he talked. And I'm pretty casual, but I knew my boss wasn't. And so I said, oh, that's not gonna, I'm fine with dude.
They just
but
had mock interviews over the last week with Jorge Ibanez, the director for IT. And then he came up and gave him a few little like feedback things at the end. And he said, if there's a table, it's just there to put distance between us. Don't use it.
yeah, that's what I'm, hands down or hold them
It's not for you
somewhere.
to lean on.
Yeah, don't assert yourself. Yeah,
So many things.
just sit back. But if you're nervous, I mean, you're nervous, and that it happens. And I don't think the interviewers don't notice. They can tell if you're nervous, but they are often understanding of that.
Oh, yeah. And they try to make you not feel nervous usually.
Yeah. And
Unless you get like some stoic, horrible person. I had one time. I was like,
and then you probably don't want that job
Nope.
anyway.
I knew 2 seconds into that interview, I was like, and this is not going anywhere.
Right. Looking at people, I think, is important. You know, making sure that you shake their hand or greet them in some way. But
And not a flimsy handshake. Like, oh my
no,
goodness, yeah.
no dead fish.
None of that. Like when you just give me your hand and let me shake it. Oh,
No.
so gross.
Yeah.
And then you don't break their hand either.
I never thought people do that.
They do.
They do.
They do.
Really?
I've never met
It is horrible.
It's really
And it's really more horrible when you don't expect it. Like the person seems like they're just like got it together, and then you go to shake hands, and then you're like, I really wish I hadn't done that.
Fist bumping.
A handshake says a lot.
I have a funny story actually about eye contact. I'm not gonna mention the place, but I went to a place once, and someone I knew from middle school worked there, and I was like, oh, are you guys hiring by any chance? He's like, yeah, actually, here's an application, and like he didn't blink at all. He's looking at me the whole time, and then he's like, but if you get the interview, like, do not break eye contact. Like, the boss is really good about that. Like, that's his main thing. Like, do not break eye contact at any point. And I was like, yeah, and I was like, no, I'm good. I'm not applying here. but then when I had an interview at another place, it was weird to me because, you know, I'm used to like looking at people and stuff, and it was 3 people interviewing me, and they would look at me, ask me a question, and then as I'm answering, they'd all like write down what I was saying. So I was like, I'm talking, but I'm not talking. I'm looking at them, but they're not looking at me. So
I've been in
it
that
was
situation
interesting.
too.
Yeah.
And so I think at that point you just kind of wait for them to finish. You don't have to look at them.
Yeah.
But yeah, the writing down, that's kind of, you're like, oh crap, did I say something I shouldn't
Right.
have? You know,
They
they're just
don't usually need to take that many notes.
no.
They usually know everything they already are thinking before you have the interview. So then anything in the interview is just kind of like, maybe there's this extra little thing. They're like, oh yeah, well, I'm looked at it and look into that.
We've had a situation where we've had to ask the candidates the exact same questions and making sure
Yep.
that each of them were answered. So we would write down what you said.
Yeah, that's
because
what it was.
we had to ask everybody the same exact questions to make it fair. And so it's really weird though when you're like, oh, they're all right.
Which could be the awkward pause on a phone interview. Is the fact that they're
Yeah.
taking notes. And then, you know, if you've answered your question, just wait.
It's like, did you not breathe in the phone? Like,
You just wait. I mean, I don't think you're reading that.
how do you do that? Interesting.
They'll fill in the space usually, or say, let me pull up another question, or okay, that's great. But also when you go into the interview, the interviewer should give you a sense of how they want it to go. If they want it to be very formal, then that's how they're going to act. But if we would say like, hey, we're pretty casual. If you have questions for us, chime in at any time. We're happy to talk about it. And so we would start off that way. Usually, you need to mimic what they're doing.
Yes. Just read them and do that.
That works with body language too.
Yeah, and that's the hard part on the phone.
Yeah.
You don't get those cues, but in person, yeah, watching how they are holding themselves and their body language, not leaning on the table, I think that's really the key there.
Don't be afraid to like just make it really clear in some manner that you want the job. Like you're not just that it's not just like one of the 20 that you're applying for.
Right.
You want this job.
And if you find that you don't want it after the interview, you don't need to tell them in person. You can follow up with an email.
Yep. Absolutely.
Because you don't want to leave a bad taste.
Or burn any bridges.
And even if you do want the job, like a follow-up email. Really.
Yes, I don't so much care about that, but I've had we're on a panel to interview, and someone will say, well, they didn't send me a follow-up, so I don't want to hire them. it's pretty
Yeah.
serious
Mhm.
for some people. So I always think it's a nice bonus, but some people take it very seriously. So I think it's a must-do at this point.
I feel like it's a must-do.
A group of people that you interview with, do you need to, everyone's interviewing at the same time, though, in person. Do you need to send a follow-up to everyone? Or
I
you
send
just-
individual ones. Yeah.
Okay.
Because if you interviewed with everybody, they're all chiming in
Mhm.
on whether or not to hire you.
How soon do you generally follow up?
I usually do it that day or the next day.
Yeah. Not a week later. That's too late.
Yeah. And if you're doing a card, like the next day, even,
Like send
Yeah, get it in the mail.
Oh.
Yep.
Okay.
or drop it off at the
Or
office.
drop it off, yeah, if you don't
Yeah.
have to mail it. That's a good point. Okay, I think that was good. We could go ahead and end and cut. I do want to remind my students that AIGA has